Hello viewers. Today we will be discussing the topic historical development of political economy. Now, this discipline of political economy developed over several centuries. For the convenience of understanding, we will study the development of political economy in two parts. In the first part, we will try to understand the historical development of political economy from the 18th century till the Cold War. In the next module, we'll try to understand the latest developments and dynamics of political economy since the 1990s. Now let us try to understand how did political economy develop as a discipline. We need to understand that political economy is a very old school of intellectual inquiry, but as an academic discipline, it is relatively new. In fact, it can be stated that political economy, both in practical terms as well as in moral philosophy, the history of it can be traced to the days of Greek political philosophy, especially in the writings of Plato, Aristotle, as well as in the writings of scholastics and philosophers and those who propounded a philosophy based on natural law. Later on, political economy emerged as a distinct field of political inquiry from the mid-18th century, relatively as a reaction to mercantilism through the writings of Scottish philosophers like Adam Smith and David Hume. And later on, French philosopher Francois Quesnay began to approach the study in a systematic rather than piecemeal methods. Adam Smith, David Hume, and Francois Quesnay took a secular approach to the understanding of the development of political economy and tried to explain political economy in terms of distribution of wealth and power and not as God's will, and tried to appeal to political, economic, technological, natural and social factors as well as the complex interactions that governed politics and economics. Indeed, Smith's landmark work, An Enquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, published in 1776, provided the first comprehensive analysis of political economy, conveying in its title the broad scope of early political economic analysis. Although the field itself was new, some of the ideas and approaches it drew upon were centuries old. It was influenced by the writings of English political philosophers like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, the realpolitik of Italian theorist Niccolo Machiavelli, as well as the inductive method of scientific reasoning invented by English philosopher Francis Bacon. Now, it should be emphasized that many of the work of political economics in the 18th century emphasized specifically the role of individuals over that of the state, and they attacked the mercantilist view of development of the state. This is perhaps best illustrated by Adam Smith's notion of invisible hand, in which he argued that state policies are less effective in advancing social welfare than were the self-interested acts of individuals, and hence he was of the view that the market should be left free. Individuals tend to advance their own welfare. Adam Smith emphasized this. But he also pointed out that in doing so, they also advanced the interest of the society as they were guided by an invisible hand. Arguments such as this gave credence to individual-centered analysis and policies to counter the state-centered theories of the mercantilists. Thus, we can see that political economy as a field of intellectual inquiry started off as a critique of the mercantilist political theory, and it gained popularity with Adam Smith's idea of invisible hand. In the 19th century, English political economist David Ricardo further developed Adam Smith's ideas. His work in particular, his concept of comparative advantage, which posited that states should produce and export those goods which they can produce at a low cost. than other nations and import those goods from other countries which other countries can produce more efficiently and effectively. This extolled the benefits of free trade and was pivotal in determining the new method of political economy, thereby undermining British mercantilism. About the same time, the utilitarianism of Jeremy Bentham, James Mill, his son John Stuart Mill fused together economic analysis with democratic expansionism. Adam Smith's notion of invisible hand, however, students did not go unchallenged. Challenges to his individual-centered analysis of political economy was put forth by the German-American economist Friedrich List, who developed a more systematic analysis of mercantilism that contrasted his national system of political economy with what he termed Smith's cosmopolitical system, which treated issues as if national boundaries and interests did not exist. In the mid-19th century, communist historian and economics Karl Marx provided a new analysis of political economy in terms of capitalist exploitation of proletariats and advancing a new theory of political economy in his massive treatise Das Kapital. By 1890, we find that English neoclassical economist Alfred Marshall published his textbook on the principles of economics, and political economy as a distinct field of academic study had been essentially replaced in universities by disciplines like economics, sociology, political science, and international relations. Thus, we find that herein comes in the separate discipline studies offered by economics and political science without converging politics and economics or state and market within the discipline of political economy. Marshall explicitly separated his study, economics or economic science, from political economy, implicitly privileging the former, that is economics, over the latter, an act that reflected the general academic trend towards specialization along methodological lines. Thus began the era of methodological inquiry of disciplines pertaining to market, state, and development. Let us now come to the development in the discipline of political economy since the 19th century. In the second half of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, as social sciences such as economics, political science, international relations became increasingly abstract and formal and specialized both in terms of focus as well as methodology, political economy was revived again to provide a broader framework for understanding complex national and international problems that were emerging. So it became evident that neither political science nor economics nor international relations could address the complexities associated with national and international problems, and thus comes in the significance of the study of political economy as a revived format from the 20th century onwards. The field of political economy today encompasses several areas of study such as the politics of economic relations, domestic political and economic issues, comparative study of political and economic systems, and not to forget the rising popularity of international political economy. The emergence of international political economy, first within international relations and later on as a distinct field of independent inquiry, marked the return of political economy to its roots as a holistic study of individual, states, markets, and society. Thus, we find that political economy developed to two broad areas of history. One, where it distinctly attacked mercantilism and rose as a distinct field of study through the writings of Adam Smith, David Hume. Later on, what we find is that politics and economics were completely separated, and again we find in the 20th century the separation of political science and economics going away, leading to an interdependent, interdisciplinary field of inquiry in the form of political economy. let us come to the second part of our discussion. What was the nature of development of political economy during the Cold War period? That means primarily from the 1950s to the 1990s. Now, contemporary political economy as a subfield of the study of international relations emerged as a popular discipline during the Cold War rivalry between the US and the USSR. International political economy grew in importance as a result of various dramatic international economic events, such as the collapse of the Bretton Woods international monetary system in the 1971, as well as the oil crisis of 1973-74. These two developments provide a landmark in the advancement of the study of political economy from the 1950s onwards. Now, since we are studying Cold War, we need to understand that the Cold War divided the entire world into three groups: the First World, the Second World, and the Third World. The First World comprised of US and its West European allies, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and later on Japan. The Second World comprised of USSR and the communist nations of Eastern Europe. The Third World comprised all those nations which had embarked upon a process of development in a post-colonial era. China actually falls into both the Second as well as the Third World. Now, in order to understand the development of political economy during the Cold War period, we have to understand the developments in the US-led capitalist political economy, the communist-led socialist political economy, as well as the southern political economy in terms of Asian developments. Let us start off our discussion with the nature of political economy during the Cold War in the United States as well as in the similar capitalist countries. Following the Second World War, United States of America and its allies created a new international economic system to provide security and economic growth for members of the Western Alliance of capitalist countries. Drawing off the perceived lessons from the 1930s, 40s, the Great Depression, US provided a security umbrella for all its allies, and new international institutions were created to foster democracy and economic growth. Now, the US, as we all know, created an unparalleled economic and military dominance to construct a set of institutions to manage the global economy. The International Trade and Payments Order, constructed as the Second World War drew to a close, was in theory a negotiated order with the principal participants, and they were the United States of America and United Kingdom. However, in reality, this order was largely shaped by US dominance and thus reflected United States interest. Unlike the economic nationalism of 1930s, this rejected bilateralism. So what were the features of the US-led political economy? The key features of US-led political economy was liberalism, legalism, and multilateralism. The new order based on liberal economic principles, but please remember, it was not a blind copy of the laissez-faire system of the 19th century. In the wake of the political mobilization of the working class and the experiences of the Great Depression, policymakers attempted to balance social welfare concerns with a commitment to market principles. So, welfare as well as market development was the core idea behind economic strategies. The multilateralism rested on domestic political economies that were definitely interventionist in nature. There was no automatic adjustment as in the gold market, nor was free trade unrestricted. The goal was to create a system that would have liberal attributes but would definitely not undermine the domestic stability of nations. Ruggie termed this order based on Keynesian principles as one of embedded liberalism. Now let's try to understand what is embedded liberalism, because this forms an important juncture in the development of political economy during the period of Cold War. Embedded liberalism was committed to a liberal international economy, but the liberalism was tempered by domestic state intervention to support social purposes such as full employment and social security. Western states participated in a number of economic institutions designed to free economic exchange. Three international institutions were created to oversee the liberal international economic order. These three institutions were the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. The IMF and the World Bank were designed in 1944 to support a stable monetary system as well as fund post-war reconstruction. Additional funding to aid reconstruction was provided by the US in the form of the very famous Marshall Plan. This attempt to create an international trade organization failed. However, please note that GATT pitched in to serve as a framework of creating a gradual era of liberalizing trade. These three institutions were created to overcome the persistent economic problems that had arisen during the 1930s and 40s. An important development in the post-war global political economy has been the creation of a number of regional economic institutions. Herein we need to understand the role of the United States and NATO, that is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. European states created another very powerful regional organization called the European Economic Community, which sought to serve the economic interest of the West European countries through the Treaty of Rome in 1957, which aided economic integration. This was the continuation of a process of closer economic integration and cooperation initiated by the European Coal and Steel Community way back in 1951. The European Economic Community evolved into the European Union, which emerged as a symbol of transnational governance. Another important area of the United States and global political economy began in the 1970s, when northern states increasingly moved from providing welfare to preparing the citizens for global economic competition. The US and the UK pushed for reforms in trade, financial autonomy, monetary regimes, which were designed to give greater play to market forces and reduce the ability of the state to intervene in the economy. Thus emerged the period of free trade market liberalization. These reforms undermined the balance of embedded liberalism that we just studied, pushing the economic system in a more neoliberal direction, which we shall see post-1990s onwards. These neoliberal ideas were captured well by the concept of Washington Consensus. This consensus in liberal economic policy was applied domestically as well as also exported to developing countries through international organizations as well as transnational policy networks. Let us learn in brief what is this Washington Consensus and what were the key features of the Washington Consensus. The term Washington Consensus was coined in 1989 by economist John Williamson. It was a list of policy prescriptions for improving economic performance, especially in the Latin American countries. These policies also had the backing of experts at Washington's international institutions, especially the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and not to forget the US Treasury to help the recovery from the debt crisis. The most important features of the Washington Consensus were reduction of national budget deficits, redirect spending from politically popular areas towards neglected fields with high economic returns, reform the taxation system, fourthly, liberalize the financial sector with the goal of market-determined interest rates, adoption of a competitive single exchange rate, reduce trade restrictions, abolish barriers to foreign direct investment, privatize state-owned enterprises, abolish policies that restrict competition, and provide secure, affordable property rights. This, in nutshell, was the Washington Consensus. We'll try to understand how the Western capitalist political economy was different from the communist-led political economy of USSR and Eastern Europe. Now, in contrast to the Western system where individuals and corporations owned property and the allocations of resources were largely determined by the supply and demand of the market, the communist system eliminated private property and allocated resources through stringent central planning by the state. With Russia's defeat of the Nazis in Eastern and Central Europe, the Soviet form of communism extended to countries such as Ukraine, Poland, Romania, and East Germany. Communist states, we need to understand, achieved a number of notable successes, but these were often accompanied by horrendous human cost and eventual failure. Following the Russian Revolution, Soviet Union was able to industrialize its primarily rural economy. By the mid-1960s, this technology has advanced to such a level that it posed a serious military threat to Western Europe and was engaged in a space competition with the US. The Soviet Union also made considerable headway in terms of women's equality, literacy, and better healthcare for its population. The 1990s saw many East European states, Russia and the former republics of the Soviet Union struggled to establish functioning capitalist economies and liberal democratic states with varying degrees of success. The Chinese communist model, which enjoyed less success than its Russian counterpart because of a series of failed 5-year plans and the Cultural Revolution, it saw a rise in industrial stagnation, and therefore China changed its model of political economy. By 1979, the Chinese leadership had concluded that economic development would require a gradual opening up to the Western economies coming out from its closed economic model. Special economic zones were created to attract investment from Western states. Now, as the Soviet Union and the US struggled during the Cold War period, another historic process was taking shape. And herein comes in the importance of the shaping and development of political economy in the southern states. Herein we'll try to understand how Asian countries created a new dynamic political economy. The process of decolonization and the emergence of Third World led to the creation of a new political economic system. Some states experienced success in their attempts to develop their economies after 1945. Japan, for example, was able to rebuild its economy after US occupation, while the 4 Asian tigers, Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong, they achieved incredible progress in the economic arena in terms of growth rate and economic advancement. The rise of these centers of economic power in terms of Singapore and Hong Kong and the oil-producing states in the 1970s was so dramatic that some analysts of the US feared that American dominance or hegemony was on the decline. Let us summarize what we have studied in this module. We have discussed the evolution and development of political economy from the mid-18th century till the Cold War period. We found that there was definite areas of political and economic interventions leading to various policies of embedded liberalism, the Washington Consensus at different periods of history. One important point that we learned today is the impact of Cold War on the development of political economy, especially in the rise of the US-led capitalist political economy as well as the Soviet-led communist political economy, not to forget the rise of the Southern political economy. We also need to understand that politics and economics have become entwined, and any understanding of market and state should take into account the dynamics and the developments in the fields of both politics, economics, as well as the rising popularity of the discipline of political economy. Thank you.